All right, just making sure we are all set up correctly here. Looks like we are. Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome. This is the weekly Jargon. I'm Abel Perez.
Jose Rodriguez.
Rohi Zachariah.
All right, well, fellas, sorry I missed last week. It seems like it's a special, extra special when we're all three in the same room. But it's sometimes very difficult. We all wear very different hats. And I think that's what we're the subject of today, right? The different hats that we wear. What is it? How does it apply to the community, the public, our friends, our family, and how can you leverage those hats for whatever you might got going on in your lives, right? So, any additions to that?
Well, speaking of those hats, just last week when you were absent, Rohi and I had an opportunity to attend the reopening of the Madera Community Hospital. So before we jump on the hats, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of chime in and tell us what your thoughts were.
Yeah, no, it was obviously a need. There's the population's far too big in Madera County and all of its surrounding farm towns, and so the need for a hospital with an ER was just insanely important, and I'm happy to see that there. It's nice to see somebody come in, and I didn't get to see the inside like you guys, so maybe you can reinforce that. But from my understanding, some renovations were made. I can see it from the outside. It looks appealing, and there seems to be talks of a lot of planning for the future of this hospital. And I will say that. I'm excited. I've always kind of feared, like, man, if somebody, had an emergency, what can they make it 35 minutes up the road to Fresno, right? And, having been in those hospitals within the last year during our closures, you see how busy those hospitals are, and people waiting in the hallway as they're, in triage, just, trying to get into a room. So I think this is huge for the community. I think it's massively important. I would like to know if you guys have some insight. So prior, this was a private hospital prior. Are we still private? Is this what's the what type of structure or is this hospital? Just so the people kind of know.
Yeah, it's still considered private.
Yeah.
The group that took it over, they are the owners of the hospital and have the full decision of what they do with it.
Right.
But yeah, it was more of just them being able to get the financial assistance from the state and to basically bring it open.
Right.
Yeah, and the makeup of their board changed. They reorganized
Right.
that. There's still two people from the previous board that are on that board, but the makeup is still a nonprofit.
Right.
Private organization running that. That's American
Awesome.
Advanced. It's American Advanced Medical, I think.
Yeah.
AAM, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
I heard AMI, but I don't think that's it. Yeah. But anyhow, it's a great thing. Like you said, it was a good thing for us to stand there after a prolonged wait. It's been some time, but fortunately, we have that hospital now open. I know that there's certain services that they've excluded for now, but I think for the most part, the key core services that are needed for a community are there.
So what does it look like moving forward? So obviously, City Council, County of Madera took a lot of heat when the closure of the last one occurred, right? And I don't think a lot of people understood that, hey, it's a private entity. It's not the city. It's not city funded, county funded. They're essentially failing on their own, right? We don't have access to their books. And then afterwards, there were hearings, and it was like, we open up the books, let us look at them, let us see, what's going on. Transparency was a big thing. With this fresh start, has the city? I know you can only really speak on behalf of the city or have insight on that part of it. But is there any type of oversight or transparency that's being demanded of this new hospital to maybe help?
Nothing directly, and again, it's been said a few times. Even the mayor said it. It's understanding, and people understand that it's no different than a Walmart. Mm-hmm. If Walmart was in a distress right now, the city has no involvement to go in. Then how can we help you? And how let's look at your books and tell me about your finances and what's no
right.
That's in the same boat to say maybe it's because of Walmart's permitting and they can't afford. Well, we can't just give them a discount because we want to help them out. I mean, there's some degrees of help. And the other issue when it came specific to the hospital is it's a whole different animal. It was their budget was bigger than the entire city county put together, so you couldn't even support them if you wanted to. There was no money there.
And I think I think for the people, it's like because it is you kind of have this this nonprofit board who are supposed to make up the people, right? I guess it's if you're I guess if you're part of that board or organization, that public transparency needs to happen, right? And I think you're obligated to, to fire those alarms early when if you feel it. I mean, nobody likes to air out their laundry, right? Yeah. Nobody likes to say like, "Hey, shoot, man, I'm like, I'm a year away from going under," right? But I think it is important to, to start utilizing those resources, whether it be your local electeds or, city governments, to say, hey, this is a real issue. We saw how it affected the city and the county, back in 2023 when this happened. So we're just letting you know, here's what we're trying to help mitigate that, right? Do you have any friends over at the state, right? Is there anybody who can try to create some urgency with the things that we're requesting, whether that be grants or whatever the case may be? I strongly urge that, and we dissected here on the show. We jumped into the issues with hospitals financially during that time, and it wasn't an isolated incident to Madera, right? It wasn't. In fairness, it wasn't just Madera who was losing a lot of money. Mm-hmm. There were several hospitals across the entire state due to the circumstances related to government insurance and the funding on those things. And so I would that's the only thing that I would ask is if you're part of those boards, you're part of that hospital organization, fire the sirens early, and so that people around you can leverage whatever resources they might have.
Yeah. My only concern, just that we've been trying to get the public maybe ready for, is understanding, like any new business, they have to gear back up, and their expenses started. It's been going even before they opened, but now it's ramping up to where they're fully staffed, which means they have to pay everybody there, whether there's one patient or 100 patients.
Yeah.
And not only that, but most of those patients, the money's going to come back in reimbursement from the insurance company. That doesn't happen tomorrow when the patient leaves.
Right.
This is months, before they're even going to see their money. So there's going to be, I would say, a scary period, probably the first 6 months, of where their money is just being spent and they're not recouping a whole lot of that. And hopefully they can win that race to say, okay, now we're finally getting the monies in before that money runs out.
Yeah, and going back to your initial comment there, Abel, I know that we can't speak on behalf of the city. Typically, it's an opinion of what we've seen. I think, like you said, we dissected this last year, I think, when we talked about it, or when it happened, right? Yeah. But the county does have an obligation, and they do receive state funding. And that's for them to take care of certain services for the indigent poor, and so that when the hospital shut down, then they had to contract services out to other areas, right? But they do receive some funding, and there is a direct connection there with the hospital. Obviously, with the state providing a lot of the funding for them to reopen, now, like you said, a lot of the reimbursements aren't done till like months later, and that's typically the way government works that time, right? The other concern is, we talked about this last week, is there was considerations of possibly cutting Medicaid. And Medicaid being a big funding source of Medi-Cal, which is the state's program, again, which reimburses a lot of these hospitals. So if you cut Medicaid, which is 60% of the state's funding, then obviously that creates an issue there. So for us as elected officials, I think we have a concern, because although we're not directly involved in the decision making, there's a lot of indirect fallout, right? We have employees that live here, and those employees obviously are taxpayers, and they spend money, they have homes, and all that income or that amount of money affects our local economy as well. And I'll give you an example. Back when Castle Air Force Base in Atwater closed down, that area of the county also suffered a hardship there with their housing as well, because now you had a lot of these folks that were worked at the air base, but now, you know, they had no more income coming through because that had to shut down. That created a devastation for their local economy as well, because all that money goes back into that system. And when a hospital of this size goes down, it does have an indirect hit to us. So we are very optimistic that this hospital will continue. This nonprofit provider will certainly push us forward so that we once again have the services that we need for our community. But you started off with some of the hats that we wear. We wanted to give you an opportunity, right? So let's talk about those hats. Now, as you know, we are elected officials. Rohi, newly appointed council member.
Yeah,
But
congratulations.
previously was also a planning commissioner.
Yeah.
And so that we kind of, lay out what exactly the roles of a planning commissioner are. Rohi, I mean, we'll talk about our elected official, but let's give you an opportunity to tell us about the planning commission.
Well, I think it started even before that when you put me. I had on a beautification committee. That was kind of my
Beautification, wow.
kindergarten schooling of planning. But I mean, it was interesting because I think with planning you had to. It's a lot more book work when you dive into it, and if you want to know about codes and ordinances and the general plan for the city and how that changes. And I got a taste of that in the beautification committee because that was part of the talks towards the end about how, where the parks go. It's based off the general plan, and that kind of guides how a city is grown. And it was kind of, I would say, inspiring because you kind of learn, like, I mean, I have a say in how things are going to go and what's going to be there, and opinions about, well, I don't think this is the best spot for this kind of item. One of those I remember came up was it was the old 7-Eleven that's across from Carl's Jr. on 145 Madera Avenue. It used to be a 7-Eleven with liquor, tobacco, all the normal convenience store stuff. Wanted to reopen after being closed. Well, they had to go through, now that it had been closed, to reapply for their licensing. Well, there's been a school that's been put in, within the allowable zone, even though it's not a traditional school, it's for the special needs type school. We still said no, it's a school, and it was an opportunity again to kind of understand that, well, it's not very cut and dry. We still had, as a planning commission, the opportunity to say, can we give an exemptions? Is there certain reasoning to say, well, it's not the type of students that would normally be affected by that kind of location? How many stores were in the area? Was there going to be basically a lack of these kind of stores if we don't allow it? And, even though it's not heated, it's not like city council where it gets a little bit more heated on topics, but it was, it was a point of conversation to kind of say, okay, let's navigate. It doesn't mean it's cut and dry.
Right.
And a lot of that, like you're saying, as far as hats and experience and knowledge, I mean, coming from the business side, it's like, I hate to say a business can't come in, but coming from the other side of kind of saying, like, we have rules in place and there's, there are statutes that say, well, you're within that bubble. That means no alcohol, no tobacco, with exemptions that say you can make those modifications. So it was a good experience, and I think that's kind of what helps when you decide to go for something like city council. A lot of the topics actually in that process of appointment was kind of like, yeah, we just voted on that last week, or we voted on that last month. So kind of seeing how that also bubbles up to the higher levels.
So it's a good segue, right, to kind of get yourself, your feet wet, and now that hat is now to our newly appointed planning commission.
And it sounds great. And, perfect example that you just gave, because, I always like to put things into perspective, because I know we have viewers that, maybe new to like local government and like, how does all that work, right? And I like how you said, there's a little bit of push and shove when it comes to, perspectives on, how does that, is that something that we want, right? It's, and I want you to think, if you're listening out there and, you're kind of like new to this and it's interesting to you, think about it as the official Facebook feed, right? anytime something new happens and it's on Facebook, you see the comment section and there's all this opinion, right? Why don't they do this? Why don't we have that? Why did they do it this way, right? And there's all of this, like, it's like complaints, right? But it's opinion, right? All this opinion on why does Madera have 5 Starbucks, right? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And here's an opportunity if you're somebody who wants to really have that conversation and really dig into the meat and potatoes of how this all works, or how the final decisions that are actually going to be made. It would be on these commissions that are essentially set by the city council, right? So you have your planning commission, transportation commission, there's civil service, there's all of these appointed commissions that you can be part of, and the planning commission being one that, to Rohi's point, decides on, hey, are we going to approve this business coming in at this location? And by the way, what is it going to look like, right?
Yeah.
What is it going to look like? What other, amenities, what modifications need to be done to the roads, the curbs, all of those things, all very important. And so it's an opportunity for you as a community member to, have an opinion when that comes, right? And so, and then that's when that opinion can come during public comment at the city council, right? Before it gets to now you guys, where you guys say, okay, we're either going to approve or deny it. Public comment's always left, and you can say, hey, look, my son goes to that special needs school.
Yeah.
And oftentimes I go during lunch and I take them for a walk. And I don't want, people who are getting a 40 in a brown bag walking out around and or whatever those type of businesses draw, the crowds that they draw. I don't want that in the environment where my son is learning, right? And then Jose can say, well, I like 40s and it's me who's drinking that 40,
right.
So don't discriminate against me, right?
Yes.
No, but it's a great opportunity to voice that opinion, but that's kind of how that kind of works. So.
And one of the things that, like when we talk about planning, right? I mean, they say that we are governed by laws, right? Obviously, if we weren't governed by laws, then this would be like the old Wild West, right? You would have just chaos and sprawl development that, quite frankly, it wouldn't be organized. So the way every city or municipality looks at their planning is they look at their general plan, right? And these general plans are updated as you continue to grow your city. You may start off as a really small, where all the core's in the center, but you plan for future growth, right? And with that future growth comes all the infrastructure that's required, the density that's required, the industrial side of it, and all these other land uses that you're going to use, right? And at the same time, you have codes and zones, and this is where I think the Planning Commission becomes very integral to this whole situation, because they're the ones that are going to be approving and or denying based on this Bible that they have, which is their general plan. And that general plan could be outdated and may require a new vision for the growth of the city of Madera. And that's something that may come hopefully in the future, to be able to give us, like, what's the growth pattern? What are we looking for? What's the vision, right? So to speak. But I couldn't appreciate your commitment and the testament that you guys have given over the hats that you guys wear, because a lot of the times folks don't really understand to the extent of what you do. Now, I understand you wear another hat also on the county side.
Yeah.
And can you elaborate on that?
It's the Civil Service Commission, and it sounds probably a lot cooler than it's this cool title. But there are some importance there, and so I think in government, right, you have your like if you've just always been an employee, it's almost like, okay, management and HR, they make up all the rules, and what they say is law, and that's the policy, and I have to abide by it, right? But you ever think about, like, man, who writes that policy? Who approved that policy, right? Like, at what point was that taken in consideration and said, yeah, we're going to do it that way? Or even if you're not employed with the county, but maybe you've looked through some of the job classifications and you considered applying, right? And you say, man, why do they want that experience, right? Why do I need 6 years of experience instead of 4? Those little details right there are all passed through the Civil Service Commission, and we take those into consideration. Now, obviously, the policies that are in existence, they already preside. We don't review them every day. We only review them, once a month if a modification is being proposed, right? So and the conversations that we're having during these Civil Service Commission meetings, as a commissioner, my obligation is always, why was this brought up, right? What's the motive behind this, right? And for me, as an appointee by an elected official, my obligation is to the people, to the community members of Madera. I'm not a muscle man for the HR, or a muscle man for the bargaining units, or a muscle man for leadership, right? No, I am there to make sure that people are being treated fairly. And those people are typically our employees, right? They're the ones that are being affected by this, or our community members who are trying to, seek employment. And so my question's always, geared towards that. How is this making things easier or benefiting our people? And I love to hear, well, we're deciding to reduce the qualifications from 6 years to 4 years so that we have more opportunities to a bigger pool of candidates, right? More opportunities here locally, things like that. When I hear those things, I know we're headed in the right direction. When I don't hear those things, I always remind them, right? Well, hey, we're making this job a little bit more difficult to achieve. Who are we attracting here, right? How many applicants have we seen? Is this, are we getting 20, 30 applicants, or are we only getting 1 or 2 from somebody in Timbuktu that's, applying because it's like, hey, I'm the only one in the state who qualifies for that, right? And so there's a lot to that, and it goes. That's typically what we see on a monthly basis at our meetings, and then of course all the way up to disciplinary action, individuals who feel like they were maybe wrongfully terminated or wrongfully disciplined, regardless of the matter. They can appeal that decision that was made by leadership at the county. They could appeal it to the Civil Service Commission, right? And from there, it's a full hearing. We allocate a set amount of days. Both sides have their representation. They present their evidence. They can testify on behalf of themselves. They can bring in witnesses, and the commission is obligated to take all that information and determine whether or not this employee has a case. And if they are, and they should be reinstated back into their employment, we have that discretion. So that's probably the more powerful aspect of the job, where because it impacts people's lives, and it could really change the course. But that's what we're there for. So I would urge anybody who's a county employee or feels like there's something going on that they would like to see change, to attend these Civil Service Commission meetings, and usually the second Tuesday of every month, and that's where you can voice your opinion during public comment, and really let us know what you're seeing out there. That's it.
So the one thing I do notice about these specific appointments is that they're somewhat of a check and balance, right? Because a lot of times people may assume that the elected official has the ultimate, and they do to some degree, right? But at the end of the day, you're taking consideration from a neutral, so to speak, commission that is giving you no different than the planning, and no different than the civil service and or other commissions that exist out there, providing you the advisory or the guidance to be able to make sure that, hey, this is a check and balance. This isn't just I'm going to decide on what's fair and what's not. There's process to that. There's hearings, and a lot of the folks, I think, they misunderstand. Well, they don't understand how the complexities of it's not just one role that you're taking. It's within that role, you have a lot of different commissions and or to try to provide that check and balance, right? So I want to appreciate that, because to some extent, I think, this happens through our communities, whether it's county or city, where you have the employment employment hearings. You have a lot of this different, and these are the types of hearings that people can go to get it done fairly. And also on the planning side, right? We can't always. So is it important to have a diverse group of people in that, or is a specific sector of people that you're looking for in these particular arenas? And the reason why I ask is because if we're looking for planning, is planning all about business? Is planning about good growth, good development, equal opportunity? I mean, I use these terms, equal, diverse, but it's not necessarily bring a negative light to it, but rather, is it required in order to make sure that you have a good judgment when you're going through this process?
I'll answer that. I mean, because I know when I got on, the general makeup tended to be more people who were like in real estate or some, engineer. And I kind of felt overwhelmed, like, is this the right place? And I felt like I could do it. I think that's, Abel, you're going to kind of probably have that similar experience because you're not coming from an engineering aspect. You're not coming from, I'm not in real estate, so I'm not looking at housing costs and, the apartment. But I don't think that's necessary. I think as long as you can sort what you're there to do, which is make reasonable decisions based off the laws that have been given to you, a need for an exemption maybe because of a certain circumstance, understanding by doing that, the doors it opens to anybody else that comes along, like that's all part of that process. So I think it does come with, you got to take your emotions aside. I mean, that's politics in general. It can't be an emotion-driven thing to say like, oh, I know this guy and I really want to eat at his place, so I want to make sure it gets in. But understanding that maybe I'm not the only one who wants to eat at this place. And sure, I mean, maybe it's, we're being a little rough on this, but maybe again, it's saying we just need to relook at this law in general. Maybe we need to make that recommendation to amend it or, make a modification to it because it's too constrictive on that sector.
So a perfect example. So you're saying that In-N-Out wasn't something driven by bias based on, hey, I like those hamburgers.
But that's why it didn't pass in a single meeting. The first meeting, In-N-Out as a whole, we were all, I don't think you were going to find anybody that says I'm a vegetarian and no more meat places, right? But the funniest thing to go over contention was the little pork chop because again, the planning side of it, like the traffic report said, bad idea. Don't do this. Like it's going to cause accidents, which we've seen. It's going to the traffic and all this stuff wasn't a good idea, but that was In-N-Out's, like we have to have it or we're out basically. That's kind of like their muscle, and that's where some of that, you're saying emotion is going like, okay, well, that's fine, but what else? What are they going to? What's the mitigation there? Okay, they're going to have staffing. They're going to block it if necessary. They're going to work with the police department. So once they kind of established on record that if we do see issues, we can go back and revisit this. It's kind of like, okay, we've done the airing out. We've done our justice. We didn't just, I love In-N-Out, put my hat on and rubber stamp it. You know what I mean? So that's what I think the public needs to see and understand is that we can make some of these changes and we can come to agreements that maybe aren't in the best interest at that time, understanding that if that problem does exist that we're presenting, then we can actually mitigate it down the road.
Yeah, that's a good. I like that example because you have like three dimensions, right, or three perspectives, and you have the city. Right now, we're talking about like the city or the approving entity, right, which would be the city or the planning commission, and then ultimately the city itself. But then you have the community, and we're saying, come to the hearings and voice your opinion during public comment. But the most important perspective is the business itself, right? And it's like the business doesn't have to choose to come here, right? They're gonna say, hey, we want to build there, we see opportunity, but we want it in this spot, and that's what In-N-Out's deal was. It's like, and people say, well, why didn't they just put it over here? Well, In-N-Out didn't want to put it right there. It's still their business, and so they could just say, no, we'll just go and build it in Merced then, or wherever, right? Chowchilla, they're being more friendly. They have freeway access too, and so there's all of this that has to be taken in consideration, and sometimes and In-N-Out in that. What would be considered a prime real estate spot, if that's the only option and the demand of the people's there, which I know it was, Well, the will of the people, has spoken. And by the way, I guess the fourth perspective is the leasing company of the land, right? Saying we want them here too. This is our land. We want them here too. So what do we got to do to make it work? And so sometimes it's I think that's where you see decisions that are made because you have an overwhelming demand for it, and but that planning is it wasn't passed in the first because there was a lot of things to consider, and if you have to have people that are pushing back a little bit. But going back to that question about diversity, I think when we hear diversity, we think about like, okay, well, we have to have somebody from every continent of the world like sitting on there, right? All different color, and and then this way all the people are covered. But what we have to, but I think what's for a lot of these commissions or boards, I think what's important is you're diverse in the experience and background that each of them have, right? And I'm not saying like, hey, where you grew up, but where did you gain your professional experience? Because as we heard, there's a lot of literature to go through, a lot of policy, a lot of things that you have to be able to know in order to get to the point where you can make a proper decision, right? Now, when it comes to so you have to be, I guess you have to have that business sense. In the Civil Service Commission, you have to have known how employee relations, some type of like human resources, all of that background is kind of key, and it's very helpful. And then from there, you can put your perspective on that. Well, hey, look, I know that, we need to be sensitive to this because of this, right? And sometimes, a colleague will say something in that sense, and man, it puts things into perspective. Like, wow, I've never experienced that, so I didn't think that was a big deal, but I can see how it is a big deal. So
I think the caution there, like you're saying, is that if we were to say planning, okay, well, it's a lot of engineering. Okay, so there should be a panel of 7 engineers. No, then the whole meeting is going to be about technical aspects and arguing over, well, you say it's 6 inches, but I think it should be 7 based on, well, that's not the point.
Right.
Like, we're not arguing over that. Like you said, it's the diversity to kind of see how does all the big picture come together. And if you really are that big into the engineering aspect, then go get employed by the city and become the part of the city engineer. Yeah. But don't argue on that panel. That's not what that panel is about, And again, you'll hear the thing that I loved about being on planning is remembering the last words that are always going to be a recommendation to the city council.
Yeah.
So understanding that process, again, that bubbling up of you're not the say-all. You guys could all say, look, we want this to happen. And the city council goes like, nope, sorry. It's out,
And normally that's really rare. It does happen, but you have to be able to back it. If the city council,
like if the public came and like in the outcrying and said like, no, we don't want this pork chop at there would have to be some consideration.
So, and the city council revoking a recommendation would have to be able to substantiate it with something other than, hey, I'm just going to revoke it because emotionally I don't feel it's the right thing. Well, you have to, right? Because the Planning Commission is giving you a recommendation, and this is where you work hand in hand. This is why the recommendations are so important, not only with the planning but also with the Civil Service Commission. But to make it's a full circle. Why we start off with these hats that we wear is because a lot of the times it's these small details that we leave out, right? I mean, a lot of the times people expect people in government or elected officials that this is the way it should be, and they're very opinionated on that. But a lot of the times they don't see everything that's part of the whole system, right? And I wanted to make sure they're boring conversations to have sometimes. I know that if we have viewers right now, they may be thinking, man, these guys just talk about all the technical stuff, but it's important because we want to be able to provide that information that at times it's not provided to you in some reading or in some social media posts. And maybe our conversations in the weekly jargon could be a little technical, and we may want to stream it down to where it becomes more like it's a catch deal, right? It's a catchphrase that you want to hear, right? Let's talk about the violence that took place, or let's talk about the like the Jerry Springer, what is it, Jerry Springer, the Jerry Springer, right? Something like that may catch your attention. But I think for us, I think it's important. That's why we call it the jargon, because we like to talk about certain things like that and get into in depth about the conversations. And I think for us, we want to make sure that viewers that are watching, if this doesn't really enlighten you or doesn't bring that goosebumps, oh, they're going to talk about it, then tell us and we'll cut it down. We'll start bringing celebrities.
I think what you're trying to say is this is an invitation to those people who may want to join a commission.
Correct.
Because there are definitely a lot of vacancies in every commission.
Yes, thank you. There are quite a few vacancies, and sometimes it is a thankless job. It's a volunteer job,
unpaid.
right? And sometimes it's the civic duty, pretty much, right? When the civic duty that we all have a responsibility, because if we all really want to look after our communities, we have to partake in
But
some.
jury duty gives me $5 for every day I'm there. I don't know.
And again, you're the jury on your peers, right?
I would say the best thing that ever happened, well, not the best thing that ever happened, but the best thing that ever happened to me in terms of understanding like city government and local government, right? Like this isn't the best thing that ever happened to me, but just for that topic was in 2016, I did the city's like Vision Academy, right? And I forgot what they called it.
Citizens Academy?
Citizens Academy, right? And it was neat because I think it was every week for like 6 weeks, you went to a different department within the city, right? So you went down to talk to the city council, and they shared what they have going on. But that was the last meeting. I think you start off going to all the different entities, right? So like we were at the Parks and Rec. We got to hear from them. Then we got to hear from fire, and we got to hear from the police department, and they give you little tours. I don't know if you guys ever been part of that, but they give you a tour of the department, and then they each give you their perception of like their role within the community, right? And so then by the time you get to the city council, it's all tied together, and it's like this is where it's all approved. And then here are the realities of our budget, by the way, right? Like we don't have as much money as you think we do. There's our infrastructure is old, and we're one busted pipe away from not having any money to do any of the extra fun stuff that everybody wants us to do, right? And so it put things in a good perspective, and it made me realize, most importantly, like, hey, I know that guy, or I've seen that person. Like, you're doing that, like how, and it's like, well, that's the first step, is like showing interest. And so like for me on this show, I think part of that, us being maybe a little bland with it, or whatever you're thinking, but it is because it's how do you get involved in these things, right? How does that spark happen? And I think we're excited about it because we've at some point in our lives like got sparked up, and now we're on fire. We're like, okay, cool. Like, this is awesome. This is how this works. When you come to realize is that our community, it's all connected, right? It's like they say, the knee bone's connected to the hip bone. It's all connected through these channels, through this infrastructure, and yeah, sure, we would all like to just have like great stuff here, but there's all these different dimensions and perspectives, and all of it has to align correctly in order for us to have the big convention center and the theaters and the shopping malls and all those things, right? A lot has to happen, and without proper infrastructure, without proper planning, without proper people in place that can help facilitate that, you'll never happen.
Yeah. I was gonna say, to Abel's point, if you're thinking that, hey, how do I get involved? I'll tell you my story is when I came into Madera. I wasn't really thinking, I never saw myself as, hey, I'm going to be an elected official at some point. But I felt that, I've always wanted to do something. I wanted to, being a branch manager, I used to love just learning new things and then passing that on to all the loan officers that were within my branch, right? Hey, you can do this, right? So I felt like I had I had this, I'm not saying gift, but I had this knack for wanting to teach something, right? So when the opportunity presented itself at a school function there, right, I spoke out, and somebody heard me say something, right? And the funny thing is that they were casting it on the news. that person asked me to go outside and say the same thing I said. Well, when I said it there, I said it with passion. Out here asking me to do it on like a script, and I couldn't. I froze. I froze on the camera, and I couldn't really say what I said out there. But somebody had heard me and said, "Hey, would you consider?" And as soon as they told me that, I was like a turtle. I put my head back in the shell, and I go, "No, I don't want the attention. I don't want that." But, I know there was something inside, and that may be you too. That may be someone that you want to, you have it in you. It's just a matter of someone giving you that little extra push to want to get out there. No different why when I saw I saw in Rohi I mean, we've had conversations about a lot of different things, right? Yeah, and I know he had a greater purpose for this city, because you've always talked about it, right? So the planning, the beautification, the planning commission, and now appointed to the city council, it's because that was a destined. You attracted that. You've always said that. No different here.
A lot of glaze.
Yeah.
A lot of glaze.
But no different here. And that goes to anybody. So attending some of these or being vocal or being just showing the passion that you have, it's because you definitely want, and you talk about it a lot with the kids, right? You talk about a lot of it in schools and sports. And I hear that. And when people, they resonate with that. So they said, you know what? That's exactly what I'm feeling. Now they need a person to be the vocal or the advocate for that person, and who better than you? It may be you. You may be the person that's going to have to step up and speak out for those changes you want to see. And that's exactly what we do here at the Weekly Jargon. If we inspire the 102 followers that we have, I hope one of you guys can come out and say, you know what, I got inspired, and hopefully we create our base by giving you guys motivation to want to do something with the civic duty.
Now, I see you out there. I can see you. You're sitting there and you're like, I want it. I agree. You guys are talking to me, but I just don't have the time. It's all that time and energy and effort, right? And this really is something for like that. I can that resonates with me because it's like they say, you find the time to do what you want to do, what you're passionate about it. And when you start getting yourself, these little victories of like, man, I had input on that. I saw us go from nothing to, progress towards that. Or, man, that conversation started 5 years ago, and I remember helping and rolling up my sleeves and helping, and now look at it's there, right? You never do it all by yourself. It's never just one person, but it takes these many hands to participate and see that the fruits of your labor down the road. And I think that's really neat. For myself, I between like 2019 and like 2023, man, I found myself, let's say pre-COVID, I found myself like part of like every like little group, every board. I wanted to just be all over the place. And it was great because you got to meet people and you got to see different perspectives and things like that. But what it started happening for me is I started getting burnt out, and you're like, I'm gonna give you 5% of my energy. I'm gonna give you 5%, and then like nobody wants 5% of anybody's energy, So it's like I had to say, okay, I'm gonna take a step back, and I'm gonna target what I'm just truly passionate about, what's relative to my life right now, and I'm just gonna give better effort to all of that. And when I started doing that, man, I realized like, well, there is a lot of time out there. There's a lot of time in the day to, commit to doing the things that you love, the things that make you feel good. And so you will find that time. Just, take it in doses and try different things. And if something really, isn't really getting your goosebumps on your back going, then scrap it and go somewhere else, right? But you're going to find something where it's like, one, you really enjoy it. Two, you're like, I'm naturally good at this. And you're surrounded by people who are saying, hey, Jose, have you ever considered doing this, right? Have you ever considered this next level? Because even though it might seem scary out there, like, oh, well, there's plenty of people who are smarter than me. Well, guess what? It's not about being the smartest. There's plenty of people that can talk better than me. It's not about being the person who can talk the best, right? It's the person who usually has the most passion for it, the biggest heart for it, and is well rounded enough to to conquer whatever it is that they're wanting to see conquered in their community. So you can do it. Put the popcorn down and get in the shower and get out there.
Fill that application.
Well,
All
looks
right.
like we've hit our mark.
Yeah.
And that's going into 30 minutes plus, right?
We're at 45.
All
yeah.
right,
Okay,
45 minutes. There you go.
So, so anyway, give us your opinion, give us your thoughts. If there's something that you're interested in, leave a comment, shoot us a message. We'll help connect you with the right people to put you on course to learning more about that subject. So, fellas, I am